Hello, fellow armchair generals. This is Gamer1745 with my continuing playthrough of Hearts of Iron 4 with Black Ice, and of course we're playing as Japan. Yes, Japan. I'm not sure if you're going to ever see episode 5. Probably I'll put it up there. But for some reason, either I just didn't hit the buttons right or something and didn't get saved. The end of the playing at the end of that game. So we're gonna replay this, replay the invasion of China. So we might see two versions. So, and I was doing a little bit of just practice while talking with the chat before. So let's continue this. So we're gonna have a bit of a delay. Let's put all of you guys under new management. And you into there. So our Marine Corps. Now, I have been doing. I've been reading Japanese Destroyer Captain book by that name. Rather good. Gotten up to midway so far, and I've learned some very interesting things. Wait a minute. Attaching to the wrong person. Some very interesting things about Japan. Since I'm moving the Marines around, Japanese. Sorry, chat. What? Well, I'm planning on doing, talking to the chat here, a naval invasion and taking out this peninsula, so that then we can push in here while pushing down from there. That's what I'm thinking of doing. I don't want to spread out my forces too much. I'm going to do a naval invasion down here, but should I come down? Okay, I'm going to kill this. And we're going to take those guys, and we're going to do, since we're having to do a new naval invasion anyways, like that. We're going to do that also. Now, learned a little bit about, or I'm learning a lot about Japan leading up to this period. Japan had Marines, and again, I'm not an expert on this, but it seems to be that they're not quite like the United States Marines or the British Royal Marines or some of the other people who had really well-trained amphibious troops. Don't know how deep I should go into it right here. We'll talk about this over time. But the Navy had sailors that had ground combat training, I think would be a good way to put it. And I figured out, well, they didn't explicitly say this, but figured out there were two reasons the Navy had ground troops for Japan. The primary reason is there was, and he even talks a little bit about this, no real concept or no real functional combined operations between the Army and the Navy in Japan. They both had their own air forces. Now you go, well, hey, yeah, the United States Navy has its air force, and carrier pilots, and then they have some float planes, and yeah, but not like the Japanese Navy did. They had some fighter planes that were only capable of land operations. They couldn't operate off of carriers, so they needed their own air arm, but they also needed their own ground arm, because and this sort of starts covering post the Russo-Japanese War, but there's lots of chaos in China, and if there's a problem and the Navy wants to do something about it, and they go and say, we need some troops in the army go, nope, no thank you, walk away. There was no real, they're operating under two entirely different chains of command effectively. The found out by law the Minister of Defense had to be an Army general. That's an interesting thing. But the Army wasn't in command of the Navy. So if the Navy wants to have land operations, you know, and you may think, you know, because we all picture, you know, Marines storming the shore, and sure, these naval infantry did storm the shore, but that wasn't really sort of their high combat purpose. It was to, you know, occupy Chinese ports or some other things like this, to operate in conjunction with the Navy. The other, not quite as important or not quite as primary role, the other role for the Japanese naval infantry was to be ready to fight the Army. And you may think this is rather weird, but there's sort of three factions within the Japanese government, if you will, under the emperor. So if you have the emperor, then you have the army faction, and there's all kinds of factions within that, including radical right-wing types. And I'm learning more about Japanese politics as well. But you have the army, and then you have the navy, and then you have the civil government. So, you know, at times it's sort of like, you know, sorry, I'm not reading the chat so much right at the moment. Though mostly they're talking about beer. Sort of like, you know, the army may just let the civil government, we just invaded this country. You what? Oh, we just invaded this country. You what? We just sort of invaded this country. The army is sort of doing its own thing. And I mean, it's completely its own thing. And without consultation with the civil government of Japan, you know, the diplomatic corps, whatever it may be. They're just off doing its own thing. The Navy is doing its own thing. And it's not, actually, it's the more peaceful of the two branches. But it's doing its own thing. And then, of course, the civil government's doing its own, you know, civil government administrative thing. And so there's these sort of three competing and not talking to branches. And just to sort of illustrate some of the stuff I found out, many of you know of the Battle of Midway, in which the U.S., I think it sinks three Japanese carriers. Well, this is kept as a secret in Japan. They don't tell people that they admit that there was a battle. They say they've won it, and they admit to losses of some destroyers and, you know, some smaller ships. But they don't admit to the loss of the carriers. Now, you may go, well, yeah, okay, it's a wartime secret. They don't tell the rest of the Navy. I mean, if you sort of know about it, you know about it, but you're not supposed to speak about it at all if you were there. And they don't tell the Army. The Army doesn't know that they've just lost three of their most important, most highly advanced, best trained in flight crews and in operation carriers. They don't tell anybody. I don't even know if Tojo, who's, you know, the head of the government in the Army, knows that the Navy loses those carriers in the Battle of Midway. Eventually, of course, they find out. So this is how faction-driven the Japanese system is, and it's I'm finding it fascinating to understand. So yeah, so this is sort of the thing. You have the original sort of Mukden incident, in which really is sort of an incident that's, best of my understanding, not what they say, but my understanding is that Japan creates to then go in and get Manchuria and set up its puppet kingdom. And this is all done basically without the civil government's permission. And so the army is driving the situation here in Japan. And that has devastating roles, devastating role in what happens to Japan. Yeah, okay, Dan. Nice Learjet, cool. Can you swing by and pick me up too? What do we do? We probably... Oh, we did improve that. Yes, the Meiji Restoration is very much what's the cause for this, and I don't know how much I could sit and lecture for a while. It's sort of a rambling lecture, because before the the imperial family, and I've studied, when I was young, back like in junior high school and whatnot, many years ago, I got fascinated with Japan when the television miniseries of Shogun came out, and then I read the book, and I got really fascinated with Japanese samurai and all that stuff. So I have a pretty good depth, and I took 3 years of Japanese once I later got into high school, so I have a pretty good depth of understanding of Japan compared to other very different countries to myself. So I have this sort of understanding. The imperial family is highly revered throughout Japanese cultural history. I'm not saying it is today. I'm saying, way back in the past. But at times, and for maybe generations, at times was like, oh yeah, emperor, yeah, here's your really nice palace. Here's your really nice palace staff. We're going to protect you in that palace. You get to stay in that palace. And it's going to be a lovely palace. Basically, you may be getting, it's almost a jail, in the sense that the emperor and his imperial family is highly revered, and he has almost no communication with the outside world, and he, and this is different points in Japanese history, and he's sort of, controlled by one or another faction. Other times he's not controlled, but there's sort of ongoing civil wars and factionalism, and if the emperor were to, because of his sort of divine status, if he were to come out and support a particular daimyo or other sort of faction, and it loses, well, what would that mean? That he doesn't have the mandate of heaven and other sorts of problems that could cause. So he doesn't, even when maybe he could, he doesn't want to interfere with the sort of daily life politics of Japan. And so that's what's going on. Then you have the shogunate period, in which is basically, a shogun is basically a, and I don't know that emperor, and this is one thing I don't know really, quite honestly, I don't know the proper translation for emperor, or for the Japanese, because I know it's sort of called the Showa, but I don't know if that's the real title, or whatever, but the proper translation into English is emperor, because emperor, coming sort of out of the Roman and Latin, sort of has a an unlimited set of authority over everything. And so you have like the Roman, and this sort of comes out of the impression, I don't know how other people would view it, but this is how I think people sort of subconsciously view emperor, sort of like the Roman emperor, and it's the emperor of the empire. However bigger the empire can get, he's the emperor. Where a king is two things that are different as I see it in sort of the general post-Christian or Christian era. One, he has it's a semi-religious, sort of the emperor can maybe be too, but sort of a semi-religious backing to his rule. Plus, it's sort of like the king of France or of England. It isn't the king of Europe, the king of the world. It's sort of the king of this. So the idea is not that there can't be more than one emperor in the world, but the empire is sort of, which Japan is developing here, as an empire, and it's potentially expansive as opposed to limited to the Japanese people, culture, and society. And so I don't know really whether you would translate it that, because you could also, in function at least, the shogun is also what we would in the West translate as an emperor, because he does during the Tokugawa shogunate, it does become sort of generational, but it is sort of a military enforced rule. And it's sort of a performance-based rule in that if he's not doing good, he can be replaced by a shogun from, an entirely different family. But the Tokugawa family ends up controlling the situation and ruling through the samurai and having a fairly extended, fairly good period of peace for Japan that comes to an end with the Meiji Restoration as the restoration of active imperial governance over Japan. Now, it's definitely a drive to modernize. It is definitely brings the end to feudalism. All the feudal lands revert back to the emperor, and so the samurai, because they talk about in this book, they get sort of like little farms and whatnot that they're running themselves. And they can barely keep it going. They have more problems than the peasants do because they just don't know how to be farmers, and they don't know how to be anything else but warriors. And so they have this real sort of period where they go from being the sort of pampered elite of Japan to still being sort of socially respected within society, but can't really take care of themselves, to, as you starting to build up the Imperial Navy and the Imperial Army, a lot of the families are moving into that service for, not just economic reasons, but it sort of fits. So you have that going on, and you have a lot of shifting of the nobility into this new imperial system, but it is never really gets centralized, and it is sort of the fault of the Meiji emperors because they never get a handle on it. Because we see Hirohito, he's approving a lot of this at different stages, but a lot of it sort of after the fact. And this is, I'm talking through the 30s and even in the 20s and whatnot, but through the 30s particularly, and not just for World War II, sort of approving a lot of the stuff after the fact, after it's happened, because it's successful and it's sort of going on. So the emperor definitely has his faults, but he's highly revered. And had he come out strongly against something like all Japanese troops, just shortly after the Mukden incident and sort of trying to create Manchukuo, had he come out, no, all Japanese troops must leave Manchuria, must leave, come back to Korea or something like that, they would have had to follow it. And had he done that, they'd have to follow it, or, as which we see, there was an attempted coup against the emperor when the emperor was trying to surrender after the 2 atomic bomb drops. Now, I don't think those troops that were attacking the imperial palace had any thought of killing or harming the emperor. They just wanted to confine him to the palace and confine him to the inability to communicate to the rest of Japan, to be able to surrender. So that they would control that, again, putting him back into a gilded cage that was by an army faction that wanted to keep the war going. So that's sort of how they weren't, I don't think it's even crossing their minds that they're going to kill the emperor. Now, obviously I could be wrong about that, but I don't think that's how they're thinking. So you have this idea that he could control the situation, but he doesn't. And I don't know that the emperor, through some of the other stuff I've read a while ago, is consulted, is weekly sort of informed of the goings-on of the government, and he has his advisors that are telling him what's going on. So he's sort of kept up, but he's not necessarily a competent manager of modern governmental systems. So I understand why he's not trying to be, if you will, the dictator or somebody who's trying to manage it. He's trying to have good people under him running the different governmental departments, and they're very factionalized. So that's sort of my understanding, and so you're right, the Meiji Restoration is a core problem of what's going on here, at least as I'm understanding it. I am not a highly researched on this topic. We're going to go there. Okay. And in standard black ice, and a lot of people are calling Japan fascist. Japan is not at all a fascist country. And part of the way I know this is a couple of times during the 30s, there's an attempts to have fascist parties, and they get like 1 or 2 people in the parliament elected, and some of them are already elected to parliament or something, I think, and they change over to this sort of fascist party, and so it just never catches hold. So fascism is not what is going on in Japan. There's sort of a like I was saying, 3 factions, 2 factions of militarism, the Navy and the Army, and then sort of a civil faction. Now, of course, the Army assassinates one of the civil prime ministers. Now, a lot of American stuff at the time, and maybe post it, keeps talking about the Democratic faction. I don't know how democratic in the American sense the civil faction was, but it was a non-militaristic. It wasn't trying to solve Japan's problems through let's speed this up, through conquest. Is sort of what was going on. Can we do all these at once? I think so. Okay, yeah, that's what I want to check. Okay, we can, convoy capacity plus 15, I don't know what our current convoy capacity is, so don't know how that helps it. I'm not sure how long they could have remained isolated. I know that was at least the general sort of thought or preference of the shogunate, the Tokugawa shogunate, obviously. But been talking and chatting some of the ideas about colonialism. Okay, there's a couple there. We talked about this before. It sort of comes out of last week's or the week before's chat on colonialism, and some of the thoughts was we can talk about the race for Africa. We can talk about other sort of colonial means, but it isn't really, in a practical sense, a choice of colonialism or not to colonialism. It's somebody's going to colonize, and you go, well, bad behavior doesn't justify other bad behavior. Yeah, okay, but we have, in more my lifetime experience, well, if the U.S. doesn't, I don't know, help out Malaysia, the Soviet Union or China will. And if they, so sort of like if the U.S. doesn't come in and to help out Malaysia, say, I know it's more of a British sort of project, but just using that as an example, if America doesn't sort of give foreign aid and give military advice and sort of meddle in their politics and do that kind of stuff, the Soviet Union will do so, and they may do so anyways, but more effectively, and they'll send in revolutionaries and they'll send in people to do things. So it isn't really during the Cold War really the sort of option to just sort of leave parts of the world alone, because whether it's the Soviet Union actively seeking out to cause disturbances, or whether it's a local revolution that's sort of happening and they send some emissaries to the Soviet Union or to communist China or whatever, and they go, oh yeah, here's some AK-47s, have fun, boys, and once you're in power, we'll send some advisors to you. So there really isn't a choice. I know there were some non-aligned movements and whatnot going on, but there really isn't much of a choice. It's a ongoing Cold War for the control of the world, and there wasn't going to be any large areas of the world left out of this unless you were strong enough and stable enough. And then even that, you still sort of kind of had to pick a side, though you sort of picked a side and you could maybe sort of step out of it from active combatant. Sort of like one person was Tito's Yugoslavia, was more or less in the communist side of things. But compared to some of the other Warsaw Pact country type things, they sort of stayed out of it. There was, to the best of my knowledge, there were no revolutionary advisors from Yugoslavia in Southeast Asia or in Africa or in Central America. There wasn't. Yes, you might find some Yugoslavian-made arms, but that's more just other things. But where you would find lots of Czechoslovakian-made arms, or Romanian and other sorts of East German advisors in other places, and things like that, that there was, much more active participation, often pushed by the Soviet Union. But Yugoslavia was sort of a combination of a strong enough under Tito and independent enough, but generally aligned to the Soviet Union, but really did not want to, at least as I see it, cause trouble for all of its neighbors in Europe. It wasn't trying to support the Red Brigades in Italy and have revolution there. It just really wasn't interested in that, but it had to sort of pick it. So colonialism is sort of the idea that if the U.S. isn't showing up, at some point somebody else will. I don't know how long that would have been. Don't know the various pressures for trade. I do know that there was, leading up to some of this stuff, there was pressures for the getting silk that was sort of monopolized by Japan, at least certain qualities of silk or something like that, and trying to smuggle out silkworms and some of this other stuff that they were trying to do, and eventually some of the world would have come knocking. And so it's not, it's sort of adapt or die. And does that justify, make all right? I'm not claiming that to it, but sort of the realities of the situation. Somebody is going to be coming, and Japan, once it really realized emotionally or intellectually or whatever, just how much behind the rest of the world they were, and it wasn't just the emperor, but and I don't know the detailed stories of Commodore Perry and what the Japanese reaction to it was, just an area that I haven't looked into much, but they really sort of realized that just how behind the rest of the world they are, and so they realized that they've got to modernize, not necessarily westernized. And Japan, many times, especially in that, because of that East-West conflict, and they are firmly in the Western camp in the East-West conflict between, communist and capitalism, or whatever you want to call it. They're firmly in the Western camp on that. But Japan, still to this day, is not a Western country. It is not a Western democracy. It is its own thing, that's its own sort of unique thing. And it is heavily impacted and modified by the MacArthur occupation. But MacArthur does a wonderful job at occupying Japan. So, you have that, I would say. So, yeah, and I'm not sure exactly adds what you're saying about their did they face it? I would say no, they didn't face a century of humiliation. They might have, had they not modernized. So they sort of saw and reacted fast to get a much more modern setup. Okay, we want to build some more arms factories. Let's look at our industrial effort. Yes, we got here before. Test the Soviets, no. Okay. No, pause. I gotta think about this. I think this is what we want to do. Yeah, because we're going to be facing serious situation with the US. Okay, and we probably should look here. Let's go with... Okay, currently we also have Teichi Suzuki. We already have him who's building speed, but so if we get him, he'll improve our... No, not him. He'll improve our... Unless we want resource efficient. Yeah. Improve our production efficiency and such. So yeah, we'll grab him. Yes. Hello, Zimbu. Gamer, good to see you. And we did do this before, but we are going to expand the Osaka arsenal. Okay, we want to wait till these... Okay, that's ready to go. That's nearly ready to go, but that's sort of okay. I think that it's going to take a little bit of time, but let's move up to here. We have our rapid forces, especially these divisions here. Now, what is our... We've got lots of artillery trucks, but not enough transport vehicles. We need more of all of this stuff. Okay, well, as soon as we can, we also need to go for war economy or something once we're at war. All right. Yeah, it's squeaking a lot, isn't it? Okay, FIFA World Cup, oil processing. Good. And so that's all good. We've got some of that, but well. Okay. But I don't know if I want to spend it on any of these things yet. We'll wait. Yes, we are trying to hopefully pull some forces away. Okay, so let's save this. Just in case we see something that really sort of messed up. Okay. And we're going to declare war. This is... no. Let's go here. I want to declare war against China. We're going to call in our allies. But we want to slow that way up. These guys, I think we are now also at war with them, aren't we? No, not yet. Give it some few moments. You guys can come up to there. I do want to push into Beijing. Okay, you guys. Go. What's not? Why aren't you guys going? Do we not control the sea enough? Oh hell. Make sure you control the areas enough. There we go. And okay. We need a lot of crap. Alright, Manchukuo, give us some rifles. Now we should be able to invade, I think. Where are the hoggos? Let's... and just even more infantry rifles. Okay, you guys pause. How long until you guys can operate? Okay, just a few more days. see if we can do better this time. Actually sort of create a pocket here. Let me just drive down and sort of occupy that. Oh good, we're here. Let's slow this up a little bit more even. Yes, round 2 or 3 or however you want to count it. Okay. Delete all the orders, yes. So you guys come there, cut off the peninsula. You come here. You two come here. And you join them. And you join them. We're creating a relatively large, relatively effective front. Okay, well. Okay, they're moving there. These guys and these guys get to attack. How are we doing with our aircraft? Okay, where are you? Oh, you're back in Japan. Oh, no wonder why. Okay, and, yeah, coming to Northern. Who else aren't we using? You're down here. Can't really use you too much. Well, maybe down here. Oh, here we go. Let's see. Go. Okay, now you join that push. You can occupy into there. Attacking us with a bunch of air power. Okay, well. Telephone communications. Well, very good. Pause. Okay, we've got that peninsula now sealed off. You guys, since we haven't gotten any opposition, go like that. Italy announces claims on Yugoslavian territory. Well, isn't that nice? Report that attack. See if we can do better now. Okay. Yes, push into there. They're moving way too slow, but they're getting there. Okay. Okay, well, this is looking like almost a pocket of sorts. Sorry, I haven't been looking at the chat. Yes, some of them are wearing the German helmets. Yes, oh yeah, Germany early on was very vulnerable. Okay, we have some free dockyards now, great. What are we producing ship-wise? Fast BBs. Well, okay, well, just 3 dockyards, so I don't know. Well, let's see here. Yeah, let's get that going. Won't be very many. And we have ooh. Can we okay, this is what we want to do. Activate World War II land doctrines. I want to see how this goes. Or does that just do it? Yes, it does it. Okay, so now we're back to this. And so we've already started with trench warfare. And we can go down this path here, I guess. Superior firepower. Okay, good. 37 days. Very good. And we're still not ashore yet. And we have our reinforcements coming. Yugoslavia claims Bulgaria. Well, isn't that special? Trying to create a pocket. And our reinforcements have arrived. Very good. Okay. Forces, you come out this way. One Marine unit. You just wander around this peninsula and take it for us. And come back. The other Marines can move out that way. Very good. And did I make a mistake? I thought this would be easy to take. Okay, Wow. Okay. Not liking this that they're pushing a little deep into me. Oh, come on, horsies, get over there. Okay, here we go. Now, trash your battle plans completely. Dump them away. Secure that port for me. Okay, that'll help. Come on, pocket these guys. And the horses have showed up. The Munich Agreement happens, okay. So we're just now seeing the Munich Agreement. Secure the border up there. And we're going to end the episode here. I want to thank you all for watching. I want to thank you for liking the videos. I really do appreciate that. And if you haven't already, please subscribe to the channel. Love to see you around more often. Please post questions, comments, suggestions, ideas, tips for better invasions. I'm sure I could use them. Thank you so much. See you next time for more Hearts of Iron.